I'm Mark Halperin.
And I'm John Heilemann, and with all due respect to Jeb Bush and President Obama, do us a favor and leave our show out of your petty disagreements.
With all due respect, Mr. President, you're just wrong on this one.
Oh, boy. Happy National Blueberry Cheesecake Day, sports fans. And our TV guide tonight, Jeb Bush's little house on the Kennebunkport compound, Twitter's version of Cops, and Rand Paul's My Little Ponytails. But first, the Clintons' workaholics. Under federal disclosure rules, Hillary Clinton's campaign released a whole bunch of financial information, but they left something out. And the AP revealed that something today. It's 6 letters long. It's called WJC LLC. And the AP says it's a so-called pass-through company with, quote, no apparent employees or assets that's, quote, designed to channel payments to the former president. Mark, this story just broke, and it raises as many, possibly way more questions than it actually answers. But my question to you is, where's this going, and how big could it be?
Well, we don't know where it's going, and the Clinton folks are playing it down and saying there's no there there. But
as they might.
There's at least 3 things this implicates. Number one, like Mitt Romney, the Clintons had tax accountants and lawyers who said you should set things up for your income and your assets for the most advantageous way possible. Could be legal, but might not look great.
Rather Romney-like.
Number 2, okay, Bill Clinton, what he did as a consultant,
yes,
not the speeches, which got attention. When he's a consultant, going to get a lot more attention because of this.
Yes.
And number 3, it opens the door to rhetoric like this from Bernie Sanders today.
Okay.
I'm not going to condemn Hillary and Bill Clinton because they've made a lot of money. That type of wealth can, has the potential to isolate you from the reality of the world.
Sanders talking to John Harwood in a restaurant there before this story broke, but this issue of the Clintons being fabulously wealthy, again, teased out by this, based on these facts.
Not just fabulously wealthy, but fabulously wealthy and engaged in a complex web of various kinds of financial dealings and holdings, not all of which are most of which are completely opaque, and not all of which, but some of which. The president has businesses other than speaking. The story points out we don't know exactly what those businesses are. We don't know how much he's made from them. There are some consultants, there's some clients that are named here, at least one of whom the State Department said you can't work for. A couple others he was allowed to work for, but this is just more fodder for people who want to dig into this financial morass, I would call it, that is around the Clintons. And I just think this is it's the beginning of something that could be quite big and quite threatening.
He got paid a lot of money. We're going to learn more about what he did to make it. All right, Rand Paul is promoting his new book. It's out today, and it's called Taking a Stand. Paul's been making the TV rounds to argue that the big tent needs to be big enough to hold, among other things, hair accessories.
I tell people we got to have a party that has people with ponytails, people with tattoos, people in working clothes, with tattoos, without tattoos, with overalls, with business suits, black, white, brown. We need to be a more diverse party.
This diversity is something he's talked about before. This is not a new message for him, but I ask you, as Ed Koch might, or Joey from Friends, how's he doing? How's this message?
I almost feel as though the way he's been selling this book, it's like a little trivializing of the message. It sounds like a little too glib. And I feel as though he had a reasonably good announcement, and then he has kind of lost, he's been kind of lost in the forest ever since. This is an important message, but it needs to be, I think, made offered in a more in a more serious, more substantive way that doesn't make it seem as though they're kind of like canned talking points and doesn't seem to kind of trivialize them in some of the ways that he's talking about them now.
He does link it up to prison reform, to drug reform, drug sentencing reform. I think in general, this is a positive message to the party. It's what attracted a lot of strategists to him as a potential person to be on the ticket, top or bottom of the ticket. I think it's not so much trivializing. I think he needs to make it more emotional. He needs to challenge the party more rather than just using it as a selling point for himself.
But I think just referring to people with to people as people with ponytails and tattoos don't want to be referred to as people with ponytails and tattoos. They're Americans. They're young people. There's like a little bit of just a shorthand that feels a little bit denigrating in some way.
Yeah, I think he's using it as a shorthand just to make the point, to shock the system, to say you go to most Republican events,
you don't see
people that. And the fact is, to his credit, you go to Rand Paul events. He's having one here in New York tonight. I bet you there are people there with tattoos and ponytails.
That's true. I bet there are.
Yeah.
Let's go.
There are some Republican events that have that, but more at his.
Fair enough. Okay. Can we talk about the Clinton thing some more? No.
Maybe later in the show, yeah.
Damn. All right. Okay. Here's the bell. Okay. The war against ISIS now includes a war of words in Washington. Defense Secretary Ash Carter said on CNN on Sunday that the reason for last week's fall of Ramadi is that Iraqi soldiers didn't show the will to fight ISIS. Today, White House spokesman Josh Earnest was asked to comment on Carter's comment, and he defended the Secretary of Defense.
What Secretary Carter said is consistent with the analysis that he's received from those who are on the ground who are looking at this situation. And he has also indicated on a number of occasions that there is an important role for the United States and our coalition partners to play in supporting those Iraqi security forces.
Mark, a lot of attention's been paid to what Secretary Carter said, Ash Carter said. Why did he say it? It's a very, it was a very bracing thing to come out and say.
Well, look, they're in the midst of a debate on Capitol Hill, right, about whether there should be U.S. troops, a lot of pressure to send in U.S. troops. The U.S. government doesn't want to do that. Secretary Carter, I think, was speaking the truth, maybe letting off a little frustration, but also sending a message to folks that this is still going to have to be an Iraqi thing. They're going to have to do better. That is the solution, in his view, and currently in the Pentagon's view. Well,
and the other thing is that this dovetails perfectly with what President Obama said last week to Jeff Goldberg when he said, my strategy is working. The problem here is not my strategy. It's not that Ramadi's fall suggests that we should rethink our strategy. Our strategy is fine. The part of our strategy that is not working is the part that lies in the hands of Iraqis, and they are always going to need to take that responsibility. So not only do I think you're right about the politics of this and making sure that the onus is put on Iraqis, but I also think there's a defensive quality to this. I don't mean defensive as in cowering, but I mean defending President Obama's strategy by saying this is where the onus has to be, and if there's a failure, it's on their shoulders, it's on their heads.
Secretary Gates tried to get Iraq and tried to get Afghanistan to fight better on their own behalf.
Right.
He couldn't do it particularly well enough. Let's see if this Secretary of Defense can do it. It's a very hard thing to do. The new Iraqi government maybe will do it better than the previous one.
It's a very hard thing to do, but in the end, if there's going to be a stable solution there, they are right. It cannot be imposed by Americans. We've tried that, and in the long run, that's not tenable. It must ultimately be domestic and sustainable on a domestic level, and so this is a painful period, but it is necessary.
Okay. All right. It's been a banner day for Twitter. Charles Johnson, a man who's gotten quite famous as a blogger and is the biggest Twitter troll this side of Anonymous, has been barred again from the microblogging service because he asked for donations to help, quote, take out an activist who's been protesting the police shootings in Baltimore and Ferguson. Mr. Johnson has been suspended from tweeting in the past. But, John, I ask you, should Twitter bar people from its platform based on the content of their tweets?
In very limited circumstances, I think that they can and should. I bow to no one in my defense of people being able to say as many offensive things as they want. Where I think a line has to be drawn is at threats. And you could argue about whether this is a threat or not, but I know that the person who this was directed at felt like it was a threat. And I think Twitter, in the context of a lot of the hate speech that happens on Twitter, they let people say a lot of ugly things. What they can't let people do is incite people to commit violence against other people who are on the service.
It's a private service. You don't have a right to be on Twitter, as far as I'm concerned.
That's correct.
On the other hand, what if somebody tweeted who didn't have his reputation had tweeted the same thing? I don't think they would have banned him. I think he's being singled out because of his past practice.
Well, they probably wouldn't have noticed if it was someone who did not have a Twitter following to the extent that he does. But again, I just don't think that, for the reasons that you just said, we don't let people come on our air and make threats, and we're not practicing censorship. But if somebody walked on here and started threatening someone, we would kick them off.
If you went on your iPad right now and tweet, if you see Karl Rove, punch him in the face.
Right.
Is that inciting violence? Should you be banned from Twitter?
I wouldn't have a problem with that. If you see Karl Rove punch him in the face, yeah, I think that'd be fine. I'd be okay with kicking that person off. Look, you can't. I just think that it would depend on whether there was a serious intent to it or not.
How can you tell from the language?
I think you can tell. You can tell, when you see it, like Potter Stewart and pornography. Like I just think there is a past practice, there is a past history here that people are looking at him in a more careful way, and I do think that has a threatening tone to it. That if I were running Twitter, I would feel perfectly comfortable. I've got a totally incoherent
position on this. I'm for kicking people off if they're abusive. But I think kicking somebody off for language that other people wouldn't be kicked off for is a pretty dangerous place to be in terms of content police.
All right, coming up, a secretive trial in Iran and a Washington Post bureau chief who was taken at gunpoint from his home. His brother talks to us about the case against Jason Rezaian next.
Today was the first day of a trial in Iran in which the fate of the Washington Post Tehran bureau chief, Jason Rezaian, is unclear. He's been imprisoned by the Iranians for more than 300 days after security forces from the government took him by gunpoint from his home. The charges against him are, in typical Iranian fashion, nebulous, dramatic, and related somehow to national security, they say. We don't know what the state is using as evidence in this trial because the proceedings are closed. Rezaian has been living in Iran for 7 years, working as a journalist. Joining us now from the National Press Club is his brother, Ali, who's become a spokesman for the family. The trial is closed. You have a lot of good sources. You've learned to be a reporter like your brother through all of this. What, if anything, have you learned about what happened in the proceedings today?
Well, you know, we found out only yesterday that the trial was going to be closed. We'd been petitioning to have it be an open trial so we could get some transparency. It's actually illegal for any information to come out from the trial, so clearly we're not getting anything from there. But what we do know is the trial first day lasted about 2 hours. My mom and my sister-in-law went down to the court, but were not able to go into the courtroom. Jason was accompanied by his attorney. There was an English translator there from the government, and the expectation is on that first day they would read the evidence against him or read the charges against him, and there would be some conversation that went on around that.
Ali, there are two. We've read that there are two pieces of evidence that the Iranian government feels are in some way incriminating of your brother. One of which is a visa application, and the other of which is a form letter that he sent to the Obama administration. It's a little vague exactly why those documents would be considered incriminating from the point of view of the Iranian officials, and what exactly that second document was. Can you shed light on those two things?
Yeah, sure. I mean, as part of our work, we take a look at whatever we could that we thought could be used against Jason. In those two particular cases, there was a process during the transition before President Obama took office to let people go online and send in information, basically apply for a job almost. What do you think about the new president and how can you help? Jason actually sent a letter. He said, I've lived in Iran. I love Iran. I grew up in the United States. I love the United States. I want our countries to be more harmonious. How can I help you guys out? Is there anything I can do in the upcoming administration? That's basically the extent of that letter. It was filled out on a web form online, and he did receive a response which said, this is an automated response. We have received your submission.
Just to be clear, are you saying that there was an application for a job?
It wasn't officially an application for a job. He was basically saying, look, if you're interested in somebody who understands Iran, understands Iranian culture, and can help you, speak more clearly with the Iranian government, I'd like to help you.
Right.
Your brother has been there for a number of years. Was he worried before this incident? Was he worried that he might have something like this happen to him?
I don't think that anybody could have thought that something like this was going to happen. This is just so far outside the bounds of what had happened before to any prior Western journalist. Jason was meticulous in how he followed the rules. All journalists in Iran are credentialed. He knew where he could go. There's a process there.
What's your theory then about why he was singled out?
I think it's hard to say. Jason, he is one of the only Americans over there that was reporting. He has a lot of friends, and a lot of people think that it might have had something to do with internal politics, trying to get some pressure on the president or something in that country, or else something else. We really don't know.
When you folks in the family, when you deal with the administration and talk to them, as I'm sure you have repeatedly over the course of the time that he's been in captivity, who do you deal with, and what are the nature of the interchanges that you've had with the government about this, the U.S. government? That is.
Yeah, we speak with a variety of people in the U.S. government, primarily over in the State Department. There are folks over there, and I've spoken with people at different levels. We have a contact over there who we talk with. She's very good at getting information from us, as well as helping us reach out to other governments when we need to. For example, reaching out to the protecting power, the Swiss in Iran, to try and maybe send letters to officials over there, things like that. I've also spoken to folks up on the Hill as well, senators, congressmen, their aides. I was really happy last week to see the unanimous resolution in the Senate calling for the U.S. government to do everything possible to bring Jason and the other Americans home.
Are there things you've asked the administration to do that they have rebuffed you on and they've told you they would not do?
No, not really. We haven't made any specific requests like that. We've asked them about things we've heard. Maybe we hear a rumor. Is that something that is true? Those kinds of things. And when we've wanted to escalate things, we've been able to escalate them.
Can you tell me how you feel about Iran now?
You know, I think I feel the same way as I did before. The people there really love Americans. They're really nice, and the government does what it wants to do. You know, they say that they've got a lot of laws, and they choose when they want to follow them and when they don't.
Okay. Really, as I told you before we started the interview, very impressed with how you found yourself in a very tough situation. Thank you for joining us. Good luck to you and to your family and to your brother, of course. That's Ali Rezaian, whose brother, of course, is being held, Washington Post journalist in Iran. We'll keep following this story. And after the break, a different story. A local family builds a home right after this.
Today in the neighborhood, a lovely American family is building an addition to their home. They seem like really nice people, and lots of local news stations just happen to be very interested in this particular family and the construction of that new home in Kennebunkport, Maine.
Jeb Bush is having a house built on the family compound at Walker's Point in Kennebunkport.
The Globe says that Jeb Bush is building a new 4-bedroom home in the seaside town.
The 3,000-square-foot home will be the second largest one at Walker's Point
and assessed at $1.4 million.
The home is being built by his mother and father, who've worked to keep the family ties to the property.
Of course, generations of Bushes have spent their summers in Kennebunkport.
The new house will be highly visible when guests arrive for Barbara Bush's 90th birthday in 2 weeks. The former First Lady is making room for the ever-growing family.
That story was broken by the Boston Globe's Matt Visor, who joins us now from our Washington bureau. Matt, you're a political reporter and not someone I generally think of as being a writer for Better Homes and Gardens. But talk a little bit just about the making of this story. It's one of these stories people are going to obsess over for at least today and possibly tomorrow and maybe for months to come. Did you dig this up, or was this handed to you on a silver platter?
It was done by not handed to me on a silver platter. I went up to write about Jeb in Kennebunkport, and while up in Kennebunkport found property records, as well as people in town. I mean, people in town, this was not a secret. They knew that a house had gone up over the winter on Walker's Point, the Bush family compound, and everybody sort of knew it as Jeb's house. So I pulled the records in the town, and sure enough, on the records they identify it as Jeb Bush's house. So that was a little bit about how we came across the story. The house is 2 stories, 4 bedrooms, 4.5 bathrooms. It's not super extravagant by wealthy standards, but the setting is incredible. I mean, it's right there on the water overlooking the ocean, along with his parents and some other homes there.
Matt, you explained in the story, but if you would for the viewers here, why is it that Jeb Bush, who's a pretty rich guy, why is his mother building and his parents, why are they building the house for him?
This is something that the parents have done. They want, Walker's Point has been sort of in their family for more than a century, and the parents want to pass down to their kids something on Walker's Point. So they've been building other properties. Jeb Bush's younger brother Marvin had a house built there 2 years ago. So Jeb is the last person who doesn't have a dedicated property for him. So Mom and Dad wanted to build Jeb a house. It comes at a completely inopportune time, given that he's running for president, though.
Well, yes, and that brings us to the political component of this, which you write about in your piece. You made the point this is not a very large property by rich people's standards, but it's got a great setting. The same thing could be said of Mitt Romney's house in La Jolla, which was not a particularly large house, but had a really great setting. Just talk a little bit about whether the Bush campaign, the nascent Bush campaign, how sensitive they are to the potential political implications and optical implications of this at this moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're aware that this doesn't look great. I mean, they were not eager to cooperate on a story just involving Jeb's time at Kennebunkport. You know, he goes up there just about every summer. I mean, it's an important part of his life and sort of what he does in Kennebunkport. So I think they realized the complications of this. You're right. I mean, it's not Mitt Romney style real estate. It's not as large. There's no car lift or car elevator in this house. It's pretty, it's pretty basic in terms of the design of the home. But I do think that it reminds people of, Jeb Bush and where he comes from, and his patrician family, and a name that honestly he's trying to sort of become his own man, as he says, on the campaign trail. So having his parents build him a house on their property overlooking coastal Maine is kind of an inconvenient image.
Matt, you covered Governor Romney, and he dealt, I think it's fair to say, pretty poorly with taunts about his wealth and questions about being out of touch. What's your sense of Jeb Bush now in this, with this and other things, when people come after him for being an out-of-touch rich guy? How do you think he will handle himself on those issues as compared to Mitt Romney?
To their credit, when they knew what we had, they cooperated. I mean, Jeb Bush sent us an email, talking about how he is fortunate and to have this. I mean, they're sort of acknowledging that, and George H.W. Bush as well. They sort of knew the direction that the story could head. So I mean, I think that it's something that he can talk about a little bit. As a side point, the only other property that Jeb Bush has is in Miami. It's not a cheap house. It's $1.3 million, but it's not, again, Romney style. It's not Hillary Clinton style. It's much more modest than their properties. So to the extent that this comes in the wake of a campaign and becomes part of the campaign, I mean, I think that the comparisons to Romney or John McCain, who didn't know how many houses he had. Jeb Bush knows he has one house, one other house.
But there is, Matt, just real quick, there is, in addition to the rich guy image, which you could argue this doesn't necessarily illustrate, this does illustrate the Bush guy image. This does put him firmly in Kennebunkport with all of the other members of the Bush clan that he doesn't necessarily want to be associated with 100% all the time at this moment.
Right, and it's the image of it. I mean, we know his last name, but literally there is a foundation being built in his parents' property right now in Maine by his parents. So I think that that's the image of him as a Bush guy trying to be his own man, independent from his father and his brother in a campaign setting.
Yes, Matt Beiser, thank you so much. Great piece. Thanks for doing this. If it turns out to be this thing turns out to have a lot of legs, the metaphor here is fairly rich for those who want to see metaphors. Again, Matt, thanks a lot, and we'll be right back.
So while we've been on the air, we've been hearing from Clinton allies about this new company we heard about today. People are in the Clinton camp, John, playing it down, saying this is organized the way all pass-through companies are organized. It's going to get a lot more scrutiny in the days ahead, I'm pretty convinced.
Standard pass-through rules, QED is what I'll say to that. Remember, we are on 3 times a day at 5, at 8, and 11. Until tomorrow, sayonara.